thanks, Monica and Nicholas, for inviting me. And yeah, it's an honor to be here, and it's going to be a lot of fun. And yeah, very quickly, my name is Miguel Sicart. Things change very quickly. So I used to work at the place called the Center for Computer Games Research, but they gave me the keys, and I shut it down and made something new. So now we are called the Center for Digital Play. So never give me the keys of your house, because I'm going to just like tear it apart. And that's because that's connected to what I'm going to be talking about today, which is, sure, games are important, but we perhaps could benefit from taking a step back and seeing what on earth are we doing playing video games? And why is it that oftentimes we think about games and as the most important thing ever, but in fact what we really want to think about is the activity of play. So I'm going to give you a philosophically oriented games-based, but going beyond games, walk through the importance of digital play. And because I thought this is going to be a cozy seminar and we are at an art institution, I'm going to throw a number of provocations out there to see if any of you bites, and we can have like a proper discussion or argument even. So let's see if that works. Anyway, a little bit I need to do self-publicity. So I've written a book many years ago now called Play Matters, which is a theory of play. But now I have a book coming out in February called Playing Software, Homoludens in Computational Culture, where I explain in a little bit of more detail what I'm going to be talking about today. So everything that does not make sense today will make even less sense on this book, but for 180 pages. So that's my threat towards you. So what are we going to be talking about today? I have a number of topics that I would like to introduce. Why do we play with computers is the main question. And it's something that has been fascinating me for ages, because I started studying video games, and video games are weird things. They are very, very complicated cultural objects. For once, and let me just start by throwing provocations, video games are not games. We tend to think about video games in the same category as games. They are not. They are totally different. They are software we play with. And yes, now you could say, oh, but you know, a chessboard is just wood we play with. Yeah, you could totally think about it that way, but I think, and I'm going to argue today, that computers do a different thing than wood does for you. So we benefit from an intellectual point of view quite a lot if we say that video games are not games, that we need to define them on their own. They are relatives. They share some characteristics with games, but they are also significantly different. And that's a little bit of what I'm going to be talking about today. I'll also be talking about the notion of play. And you know, there's this funny thing about play scholars. The concept of play has been presented and analyzed and studied for the last 2,500 years, give or take. And everybody has their own definition of play. And back in 1998, one of the classic scholars of play, Brian Sutton Smith, wrote a book that I think in the first page said, because of the multiple and shifting capacities or natures of play, we cannot define it. And then by the end of the book, he wrote, and this is my definition of play. So it's kind of like we play scholars, we are like Sisyphus. We are constantly trying to define this thing, and we always promise to ourselves, I will not define play again. So of course you know that I will end this talk by defining play again. I'll move beyond video games. That's another of the things that I want to talk about today. I want to talk about digital play outside video games and what kind of problems may it have. And then my final argument, and it's a sort of general argument, both of my book and hopefully also of this talk, is that play shapes computational culture, that we cannot understand the information age without understanding play. Play through games or video games, but also play through other manifestations. So that's what that's a little bit the introduction that I'm going to be giving you today. So let's get started with part one and the easiest question ever. What have computers ever done for us? Okay, so what is it that computers do? What is it that a computer performs in the world? So I think to me the most important starting point or the premise for my talk is that we live in the information age. And I know that this is very simple and obvious, and for many of us it's trivial, but we cannot understand, as Jeppe was saying, our culture without computers. And what computers do for us is very simple. They calculate things very fast, and they can store and manipulate data in ways beyond human capacity, as long as that data is presented in a way that it's computable. That's what they do. They do another thing that is really interesting, which is that they network, so they can create networks, and in those networks, these capacities grow exponentially. But more than that, they really don't do anything else, except shape our society. Because everything that we experience nowadays, okay, a little bit of a broad argument. A lot of our society is determined by how it pushes to be computable. It's called digitization. In Denmark, they are all very crazy about, I live in Denmark, so everybody's very crazy about digitization. They've been crazy about it for the last 20 years. And it's like everything can be digital. Your identity can be digital, your social records, your entertainment, everything can be put into a digital system. What happens when something becomes part of a digital system? It becomes represented in data that can be computed. So at that moment, the moment we digitize something, we are introducing a computer that will perform operations on that data. It facilitates work, perhaps. It represents it in a different way. It maybe allows us to see different forms and patterns, and it allows us to act on it automatically, as we call it. So the computer can act on it. This is the fundamental revolution of the information age. We transform our reality into something that a computer can act upon. And when we do that, then suddenly computers are shaping culture and society. And we go into panic mode. And we really, okay, so how do we make sense of this phenomenon? Okay, so we develop a number of philosophical, mathematical theories and disciplines to try to make sense of it. So we do cybernetics, which I will get back to towards the end of this lecture, information theory, systems theory, computer science, analytic philosophy. How do we make sense of a digital world? Through all of these disciplines. And what we are trying to make sense is, again, what happens when a computer is performing operations on the data that represents our world. Media theory gives us cultural readings, and we even have things like digital humanities, game studies, post-humanism, humanities theory. I'm a humanist at heart, that also try to understand this cultural shift. And all of this is great, but I would say perhaps the most interesting way of making sense of computers is and has been play. So there's a long history of computation, and I'm going to sort of trivialize it a little bit, but my premise is that when we have a computer, we are going to play with it. Once we stopped killing each other in World War II, these electronic computing machines, these sort of room-sized computers were deployed at certain universities for helping with very complicated calculations. Yeah? So we needed to do science with it. Except, of course, in the evenings, some hackers, originally hackers, right? So people who wanted to do things with these systems differently, went down to those massive frameworks, and what did they do in those frameworks? They made games. For every single computational new technology or progress that we are going to have a playful manifestation. We have machines that can simulate physics, we make a video game, Space War. We have massively networked devices around the world, we are going to have massively multiplayer online role-playing games. We have high-definition displays that can render graphics in real time, we are going to have virtual reality. The first use of computational technology is going to be through games. Video games, any form of video games. what we really want to do is to play with these things. Why do we want to play with computers? What is it that we want to do when we play with computers? Why is it that playing is this filter or this perspective that allows us to look at computers in a different way? Well, that's the core of my argument. Oh, this is a different slideshow than the one I sent you. Last. Okay. So, we have a problem here. Great. I have changed from this to the other. Okay, let's see what I can do with this, because this is a little bit different. Anyway, let me talk about part 2. What is play? Okay. I've talked about this. Defining play is a lost cause. So the better approach is always to talk about a rhetoric of play. Let me just find my old slide so I can follow what I was going to say before I thought that I was going to say something else. In the meanwhile, there it is. Okay, that's great. Oh, and this is also way more things. No, yes. No, this is not it. Okay, anyway, I'll move on. Playing is a... So instead of trying to define play, what we need to define is the different rhetorics of play. So which kind of angles of, what's it called, of understanding, what kind of epistemologies can we use to allow us through play to understand the world. And that's why play can be seen as a way of analyzing culture. So when I talk about play and the role of play in computational culture, it is all about looking at cultural phenomena through the lens of the ludic, through the lens of play. So how does this work? Play is a way of making sense of the machines. Play is a way of making sense of what computers can do. Anybody recognizes this art piece? No? Okay, so it's called unfitbits.org. It's relatively old now. It's from 2011. So any runners, sports people in the room who like to track their behavior? I think that's... oh, okay, so only... I've seen none. But you know that it was at a time, and it's still quite popular, but at a time the quantified self was a thing. So I used to be a runner myself a few years back, and I was a cyborg. I was like a proper cyborg. I was running with like a pulse meter and a smartwatch and like a thing that calculated my steps. And all of that was so the computer could calculate how much effort I was doing. And then this art piece is a commentary on that. It was a series of strategies to reach 10,000 steps on a Fitbit without actually walking 10,000 steps. So if you hook up a Fitbit to a metronome, with a weighted metronome, you could actually just let it be there, and then you would walk your 10,000 steps every single time. The quantified self technology is a technology of control. It's a technology of a measurement of the individual. It's a calculating device for human behaviors. What we do when we play with it is we stabilize it in a different way. Instead, it's an instrument of fun. It's a silly toy. It's something that we can make fun of. We can make fun of it through the lens of art, through the ludic artistic perspective, but we can also sort of break its enchantment by moving things back and forth. So the lens of play, the activity of playing, what it does is takes what computers can do, modifies them, it approaches it to what we want to do as humans, and then it creates, therefore, cultural expression. So the culture of video games, the culture of playing with digital technologies, is the culture of us appropriating what computers can do and using it for something else than communication and control, than processing and quantifying the world. So that is the role of play when we engage with or connect with machines. So I would like to go beyond video games. I wanted also to talk about video games, so maybe I will just do that a little bit ad lib at the end, of this presentation. So I wanted to show you how play is so prevalent in our world and talk about things like depth cameras. And I know you're all here because you were promised games, and here I am talking about depth cameras. Why? And it's because I've locked the door and you cannot get away from here, and now you're going to hear me rant about depth cameras. So what is a depth camera? I have an iPhone 12 something mini, and it can look at me and it can recognize my face, and then it unlocks. That's a depth camera. So it's a camera, it's actually an array of cameras with a number of other sensors, infrared, and some of them even have a tiny laser-based radar-like technology that can read not only a sort of a 2D array of data, but also a depth array. So it can actually see in depth. And we've had this technology for ages. What we used to do for them is like these depth cameras allowed for computers to have a more precise understanding of the world they were inserted in, they had around them. We have self-driving cars thanks to this technology. We have art exhibitions where sometimes you go in and it tracks your skeleton and you can move around and it reacts to it thanks to these technologies. We have augmented reality, which is the next virtual reality, the thing that is going to come, but it will never come, thanks to these technologies. The main problem is that a depth camera functions in such a strange way. It's so different than the way we see the world that they are difficult to understand. So when we have a computational technology that represents the world in a way that it's difficult to understand, the first thing that we do is we play with it. So even though we had depth cameras for ages, at military operations, at industrial operations, we as users became familiar with the fact that a computer could actually see depth and track skeletal motion thanks to the Kinect. The Kinect, which was a peripheral for the Microsoft Xbox that allowed the computer or the gaming console to be controlled through our body. And it would actually be able to see the space in which the user was. We have a technology, depth cameras. We introduce it in the world through playful technologies. Not in the world, it exists before that, but in our culture, it has an effect in our culture through a direct gaming technology. But it doesn't stop here. This is a portrait of myself. I should put down their self-portrait of the author through iPhone. When Apple launched their depth camera-enabled phones, starting with the iPhone 10, Apple knew that the fact that the computer recognizes your face is fairly creepy. So how do you lower the creepiness of that? By turning it into a toy. Look, we can recognize your face, but you can also turn your face into poop. It's great. What's not to like? This is a toy. A toy lowers our threshold of threat, and it also allows us to understand what this system can do and play around with it, explore its possibilities. Now, everybody who has a Snapchat has been using Snapchat filters. There's no other reason for using a Snapchat than the filters. It's a filters application. Every other use of a Snapchat is wrong. And the filters are basically an extension of the animojis. Look, we can actually take your face, and because we have these advanced, not just the cameras, but also the algorithms behind the cameras, where we can calculate facial positions and find distinct elements in them, then we can put filters on top of them. Ta-da, you're playing with it. Yes, we are also tracking your face. It's pretty creepy, but hey, you're playing with it, right? We are easing you into it. So this is how we do it. And then in the end, we have Pokemon Go, which is actually, let's put that out in the world and let's modify human behavior. And I loved Pokemon Go for like 10 minutes back in 2016. It was great for the first month because you could see a lot of people like excitedly walking around, and it was like a social activity. But Pokemon Go was another way of saying, look, this camera does not need to look just to you. We can actually point it at the world and things will come up in the world. This technology, this computational mode of understanding the world, this computational agency can be presented so that something can be put out in the world. So we get familiarized with augmented reality thanks to a video game, playing a video game. So that's a genealogy of how this using play and playable media to familiarize and create cultural expressions of computational media. That's one way of tracing this history. Another case, oh, and I love this one, artificial agents. This is one of my favorite ones. And I don't know how I'm doing on time, by the way. I'm fine, okay. Eliza, some of the people in the room might recognize Eliza. Yeah? Okay, so Eliza is perhaps the first popular computational agent ever made. In 1962, 67, dates always jump in my head. A computer scientist and philosopher called Joseph Weizenbaum wrote, whose work was in artificial intelligence, but most specifically in natural language processing at that time. So how to get a computer to recognize words as we recognize them. In order to showcase some of his technological, or sort of not technological, but scientific arguments, he programmed a what we would call today a chatbot that would be able to recognize the input from a user typed on a keyboard and would reply to it accordingly. So it would behave as if it was a psychologist. It would behave as if it could recognize the words, it could recognize meaning, it could recognize context, and reply in a sensible way. Of course, it was all fake. And Weizenbaum writes about Eliza, saying, like, it was all fake. The great discovery for him was more than the computational system that he wrote, the fact that people actually sat down in front of this agent and confessed to it. This Rogerian psychologist that was basically a chatbot, we approached it and we talked about our problems. We wrote our problems. A computer trained to recognize a number of keywords and ask a number of predetermined questions was treated as an artificial agent. And this was a revolution that led to chatbots. And please take a minute to read the screenshot because it's the best screenshot in the history of screenshots. This is absolutely brilliant. What's going on here? Because it's an act of comedy. What's going on here is that now we are used to connecting to artificial systems and giving them a computational personality. We expect computers to recognize what we tell them and to act in a agential computational way. We have these complicated systems to service us, to help us navigate the world, to be our butlers and maids, and we treat them as if they were people. Until, of course, it breaks down, and then we can talk a lot about capitalism at some moment, because all of this does not make sense if we don't talk about capitalism, but we don't have time to talk about it today. But we actually play with it. You can see in these two sentences that what this user is trying to do is to play with it, to see, okay, how far can I push this particular interaction with this artificial agent? How much can I express myself? By getting these systems of data processing presented to us as something that we can talk to, we are, again, lowering the risk and creating new forms of cultural expression. For example, voice assistants. And yes, this is an actual piece of news. People are having sexual fantasies with their voice assistants. Siri or Alexa or Cortana or the Google Assistant, they are mundane presentations of these artificial agency. They are the perfect wrappers around these massive systems of communication and control, of calculation, of data extraction, and they are presented to us as something that we can relate to, as characters that we can emotionally bond to, as people we can play with. We call them voice assistants, but it would be perhaps a little bit more correct to call them sometimes playmates. We are role-playing that they exist. And so much so that we can even have sexual fantasies with them. There was a job posting in late 2019 from Apple asking for an engineer with a background in psychology to join their Siri team because Apple realized that people were having serious conversations with Siri about their mental health. And even though we, to a certain extent, understand that that's a computational system, we are role-playing that it's more than that. So when I say play, I'm not just referring to the ludic leisure activity of playing. I'm also thinking about role-playing, pretense, make-believe, the capacity to imagine that something is more than what it is, of creating a world in which these systems not only have full agency, but they also understand us. So that's what we do when we play with computers. And of course, this means that there's a dark side to it. The internet. So I'm old enough that I remember the world before the internet. I was not that good. Despite whatever Stranger Things is telling you, the 80s were horrible. Just look at the hairstyles. Sorry, that's a 90s kid talking about the 80s. But one of the promises of the internet was like, this is the famous cartoon in the New Yorker cartoon, on the internet nobody knows you're a dog. So the idea is that the internet would be this final frontier where we would be anonymous, we would have democratic, equalitarian conversations, and meritocracies would rule the world. And of course, we all know that this is exactly what we have nowadays, right? This is what the internet gave us. No. The internet gave us 4chan, and then 8chan, and then all other environments in which people went in and created horrible cultures. Why do we go to the internet and create horrible cultures? Because one of the ways of, and also lovely cultures, so the internet is also good sometimes. But why is it that we have 4chan or Twitter or Facebook? Why do we have these massively multiplayer and role-playing games as entry points to the internet? We do so because our immediate understanding of these platforms is I'm going to create a character where I'm going to role-play and I'm going to engage with others in that way. And these platforms understand that we are role-playing it, and they use role-playing mechanics to further their use. So we get likes and shares and retweets and all kinds of quantifiable competition markers that helps us go in sort of a play mode through our lives on the internet. When we are on certain parts of the internet, we are in closed competition worlds. We are in game-like worlds. And I use the word closed because that's what these worlds create. They create closed worlds. So the notion of closed worlds comes from a historian of technology called Paul Edwards, who studied the discourse of the military complex in during the Cold War in the United States. And what he ended up discovering is that there was a rhetoric, a discourse that justified a lot of the actions that took place during those years that he called a closed world. So, how do I explain this? If you look at everything through the lens of a computer, if you look at the world through the lens of what can be computed, what can be calculated, everything gets reduced and everything looks like a game, like a video game. Everything looks like something we can play with and win. And that discourse is a closed discourse. We cannot create anything, we cannot contribute with anything, we can just perform the actions that are acknowledged and computable by the system and get rewarded by them. We are basically rats pulling levers and eating all the nice candy that comes from it. And to me, one of the main examples of these closed worlds are conspiracy theories online, particularly in certain parts of Western culture. There's a long history of conspiracy theories. This is just one vector of explanation of why conspiracy theories work. But the reason why conspiracy theories now are not just the idiot of the village and 10 of their friends, but like 100,000 people, is that these conspiracies spread through computational systems that reward this kind of closed world mentality, that reward the spread of certain ideas that are reinforced by popularity, by sharing news, by likes, by retweets, by the louder megaphones. The logic of conspiracies gets amplified by these computational systems, and they also reflect these computational systems. What a good conspiracy gives you is another view of the world, the view that nobody else wants you to do, a view that requires non-trivial effort to acquire, and that once you go through that non-trivial effort, rewards you with the truth. Right? So you need to do your research, and when you're done your research, you will know the truth. Other things that require non-trivial effort for success: video games and games. Yes, okay, I'm soon done. So, one of my polemic arguments for the day is conspiracy theories are, particularly online conspiracy theories, are a consequence of the play lens applied to our computational life. When we play with computers, we can fall into this kind of closed worlds where the logic of conspiracy makes so much sense that it substitutes the logic of reality, the logic of the world. And it gets reinforced by the very computational systems in which these conspiracies happen and take place. So, I am reaching the end. What should you take? What is the idea takeaway from this? So, play and playing is a way of relating to computers, making sense of what they can do. In philosophical terms, is to deal with their inherent multi-stability. That's a post-phenomenological term. If anybody wants to discuss post-phenomenology, I'm pretty sure that we will have plenty of time to discuss post-phenomenology afterwards. And the framework that I try to present now is this idea of playing as a form and a way of making sense of computers allows us to see also the role of play and the ludic in shaping our computational culture. So that's basically what I wanted to say. Every time you play with a computer, you're trying to make sense of what it can do. And so the final polemic argument that it's not on this slideshow is that, and it's something that annoys my philosopher friends, computers have agency. Computers are agents. And I know many other things, philosophically speaking, have agency. Trains and chairs and glasses. But computers have a qualitatively different type of agency than most other technologies before, because they contain the world. For them to operate, you have to represent the world so they can perform operations. The second we represent the world so they can perform operations, we live in their world. We don't live in ours anymore. We are embedded, we are assembled with them. It's an assemblage of human agency and computational agency. That's the main point. How do we assemble with computers? In many ways. Through work, through our social life, and I would say primarily through play. So when you're playing video games, you're also trying to make sense of how this computational representation of the world can be used as a plaything. And therefore we are creating culture. But that play perspective can be seen on almost any manifestation in computational culture. I think that was the end. No, it was not. Oh yeah, I have a lot of things to do. So I don't know why I put my to-do list publicly on a presentation that is recorded and it's going to be on YouTube, because now I'm sort of bound to answer these questions. But this is the things that I feel that my project has to do. So why should we play? What does play give us that other relational strategies don't? What happens to computational things when we play with them? And applying the ludic computational culture perspective, so playing with computers. And I do have a final plug. I am doing this work right now. It's a project called Ridiculous Software. And if you want to know more about it, you should just go to the URL ridiculous.software, where together with a group of like-minded collaborators, we are making stupid software. And it's just the most rewarding thing ever. And now I'm actually done. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Miguel. We're running a little bit late, and maybe that's
even
my fault.
No, I think it's my fault.
But there was one thing which really interested me, or that I kind of go back to in terms of this. The way I understood you is that play is one of the places where we have all this qualitative data and boring computational systems, but play is one of the places where it comes alive for the individual. Is that actually a defense of hackers in a way?
Oh, absolutely. The coming alive is actually a very good phrasing. The hacker ethos, the old-fashioned hacker ethos, is that perspective. It's a playful perspective. It allows us to look at how a system is and imagine how it could be. And there is nothing more playful than actually asking that particular question. I'm not going to do what you want me to do. I'm going to do what I want to do within your space of possibility. So absolutely, it's all about that self-expression. And we have that also on playgrounds, right? There's a playground out there, and I'm pretty sure that no kid plays in that playground as the playground designers thought about it. And that's exactly how we should use computers. Not in any of the ways anybody who made them thinks we should use them. Yes.